My name is Jim Ray. I'm from Orange County. And a friend of mine goes to this group, Chris Griffin. I don't know if some of you have met him or not. And I've been a Mac developer for about 25 years and also do PC development. And primarily for the last 20 years, I've been developing and selling a commercial product called Panorama, which is a RAM-based database program. And it's a standalone program. It's kind of like a FileMaker in that sense. People build apps with it, build databases. Generally has nothing to do with Rails. So why am I here? In the past few months, I've built a system that integrates this standalone RAM-based database with Rails, and it lets you do, basically it kind of integrates so that you can do things that are not that easy to do with Rails, but are easy to do on a desktop app, things like reports and analysis and printing mailing labels, data entry. What's that? It's not on? Yeah. I think I put it in what that pocket is instructed. It's weird, I hear Hello?
Is that better?
Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Could you hear? Should I start from scratch?
Sure.
Yes or no? How many people you got? Did you?
I could hear you before.
You could hear me before, just not that well. Right, okay. Wow, now I'm being blown back by sound. So, this application is actually all written in our database program, Panorama. As you can see, it's running here. And I've got the Track Magic window open. And the first thing this does is it's got basically a Rails application browser. So every time you launch it, it scans your hard drive and finds all of the Rails applications on your system. So you can go around and browse on different Rails applications. And when you click on one, it shows you all the tables in that Rails application. And you can click on a particular table and see all the fields in that Rails application. Now actually, when you first start using this program, what you'll probably want to do is go here to Favorite Hosts, because one of the things this can do is organize all the hosts that you use. Keep track of that so you don't have to. So here's all the hosts that I have, on my system. And when you first get this program, what you can do is just open up Favorite Hosts and press Scan Hosts, and it will go through your whole system and find all the database YML files and build a list of all the different hosts that you have with all their settings. So from that point on, you'll be able to use a host just by selecting it from a menu instead of having to go back and look up what all the attributes are. And you can also edit them manually, so I can double click on this and see, okay, here's my local MySQL host, etc. And I can add them manually as well. Now, you'll notice that over here on these table names, in this particular case, I have this little cube icon, and that's the icon of a Panorama database. So that means there's a local copy of this database in Panorama format. And I can click on that to open it, and that opens this local copy. So now I want to make sure that I've got the same data that's in the Rails table. So I just say download data from Rails. And it's now downloaded the data and made a local copy of it in this local RAM-based database. So I can scroll around. I can do things like sort it in different ways. I can do some searches and selections that I'll show you in a minute. And now it's a two-way integration with Rails, so I can go in and say, okay, this isn't really Reno, it's actually Truckee. And after I edit that, it turns purple to show that it's been edited, but it hasn't been uploaded to Rails yet. So let's change something else. So we can change a bunch of these. And at any point, I can just go to upload all changes to Rails, and it'll submit those Now, the way it talks to Rails is through it's actually talking to active record. So it's just using standard, basically it writes a little piece of Ruby code and calls it active record. There's no modifications needed to the Rails application. And here, let me go to another table here. So I can search for applications, and let's find this one, and open up this table here. And in this case, this is set up to automatically launch Mongrel when I open up the local copy of the server. So now, or the local copy of the database. So now I can say, open up that app in Rails, and doesn't know about my new screen size. So here's the same data in Rails, and I can take, like let's take this Blue Cross record and edit it, and I'll change this to 2975. So we've got a healthcare crisis. So I'll go ahead and edit that, and then I'll go to Blue Cross, and I can just say download current record, and there it shows the current record. So it's a two-way, and you can actually do this editing offline if you want. You can download from Rails, and you can go somewhere where you don't have an internet connection, and make changes even, and then when you come back, you can say upload to Rails, and it'll upload all the changes that have been made. Let's go ahead and open this contacts database. Okay, let's see. Do I have any data in that now? Yeah. So it just brought down the data from Rails, and I'll go ahead and save that locally. And now I'm going to go ahead and make a mailing label for this. So I'll just call it label, call my label, and say quick label. And then I have to tell it how I want the data laid out on the mailing label. So you just sort of put a comma there. So this is the template for the label, and this is a graphical editor here, so I can go and draw lines and put graphics on there and stuff like that. And now I switch to data mode, and I'll go ahead and say print. And we'll preview that too. And so there's the mailing labels. So basically, for example, I could take any Rails database that had data in it and make a mailing label and print it in less than a minute, and then edit it graphically. And you could also make all kinds of graphical reports. You've got full control over different levels, pagination, widow and orphan control, all that kind of stuff. Now, this program also has a graphic interface for creating and maintaining Rails applications. So here let's say I want to make a new table in this application. So I'll just make another address type application. And we'll give it a name. We'll call it people. Oh, so this is still thinking the screen size is different, but you can see this is the rake output for creating that table. And I guess I should have called that person, so it would have pluralized properly. Now you can see I don't have a local Panorama database for this new table. So So if I want to create one, I just click this plus icon, and it goes and creates a database with the same field structure that the Rails table has. So for your existing Rails tables, you would just go, you'd see plus signs here, and if you want to create a local mirrored copy, you just press the plus sign, and then it comes up with the options dialog, which of course you can come back to later, but you can pick which environment you're going to want to work with, and of course you can change that any time. There's various other options, like whether you want to launch Mongrel automatically, whether you want it to honor validation or not when you're doing data entry. And now I'll tell it to download data. Of course, there's no data in it yet. But let's go ahead and get some data. So what I'm going to do is I've got some addresses in my address book, and Panorama's got a wizard for working with vCards. So let's bring up address book. And I've got a bunch of names selected here. So I'll drag that on there, and it's going to go ahead and import those. Now if you've got a straight tab or a text-delimited data file, it'll go a lot faster than this. It'll basically import instantaneously. But here's the data. Got one blank record. I'll go ahead and delete that. Now, right now, it's not. This data is not in the Rails table yet. But all I have to do is say upload all changes to Rails. And now it's all in the Rails table. And let's see. And there it is in the Rails application. Now let me go back to this check table I had a minute ago and show you some of the analysis tools that Panorama has. Here we've got a bunch of data, and maybe I'd like to really see summaries of that by month and maybe by category within the month. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start Panorama's recorder so I can reuse this analysis I'm going to do. And I'll click on the date field and say group up and by month. And so what this has done is it's sorted the table by date. And then at the end of each month, since that's the group I specified, it's added what we call a summary record. That's a special temporary record. It's never written to Rails, and it's just used for analysis. I'll show you a little bit more in a minute. So now I'll go to category, and I'll say group up again. And that'll add more summary records, a second level of them. So you can see here we've got the monthly here still, and then for each category within the month. So now I'll go over to debit, and I'll say total, and it's calculated all the subtotals for each month and for each category within the month. Now it's kind of hard to make much sense of this as is, so I'm going to go and to the outline level command and say collapse this down to the date, and now it's showing me just the monthly subtotals for each month in there. And at this point, I'm going to stop the recorder and say give it a name, and now this is in the action menu, and at any point I want to repeat those steps I just did, I just select that and it'll repeat that to do that analysis. Now, of course, any kind of reporting program can calculate subtotals. That's not really a big deal, but what's pretty cool about what we do is that these are actually temporarily live and part of the database, so I can do additional stuff with them. For example, I can look at this and say, okay, August looks like it had kind of more spending than most other months. I wonder why. So I can click and expand that, and so now I see the next level of detail below that. And then I can click on something in that level and expand again, and I get down to the raw data. So you can selectively, expand and collapse to see just what's of interest without being distracted by all the data that's in there. If I go back to the outline level, now I'm going to pick categories. So now it's showing all the categories and all the month summaries, but none of the raw data. And again, I can continue to do further operations on this since it's live data. So I'll sort down by the debit. And so what that's done is ranked within each month the categories. So we can see that payroll is, always the biggest category, and advertising, well, this month it's big, but here it's not so big. So this is really great for answering questions like, what are the top products, what regions are growing the most, things like that. You can really get in and explore the data. Now, as I mentioned at the start, these summary records are all temporary records. So when I'm done with them, I just say remove summaries, and they're all gone. There's also another tool for analyzing data, which is called a crosstab. And we set one of those up. And I'll say I want to do this by month. And then by category. And then we'll do debit. And when I press OK, it goes and makes a special table which shows the summaries. It's basically the same kind of data that I just had, but now it's showing it in essentially like a pivot table of months versus categories. And eventually over here there'll be a total for the whole thing. So I can look at this and say, okay, $2,380 of purchases in May '08. And just like with the outline, this is live, so I can just say, okay, select original data, and in the data sheet, it shows the May '08 purchases. So I can click on any cell in the crosstab, and then say select original data, or I could say I want to see all the shipping, no matter what month it is, or everything in February. So this is it's a great auditing tool for, looking for anomalies in your data. They'll pop out immediately when you go into this format, and then you can just say, okay, what is it? And then this is, of course, editable, so you can make changes, and then you say upload to Rails. So all this stuff will work instantly with any databases that you have with Rails. Oh, I wanted to show some more something about searching, because let's go back to the hobby shop. That's got a nice big, oops. Because this is RAM-based, you can do real fast searching. So I'll bring up what we call live clairvoyance. And this is a live search window, kind of like Spotlight or like iTunes. So let's say I type in Houston. As I type, it'll do a live search, and it's searching, in this case, it's searching all the fields in the database. So you can see that it found this person has a name of Houston. Most of these are in the city of Houston, but I believe there's also a street. Yeah, here we go. So it actually, as I'm typing, it's live searching all the records, and that scales well up to even hundreds of thousands or more of records. In addition to just a straight text search, you can also switch to formula mode and type in a Boolean search. I've got a couple here that you can store up in advance. So this is saying take the last word of the name, so the person's last name, and find people that sound like Miller. And you can see it found a couple that sound like Miller, although they're spelled differently. And again, this is live. I can just like type in Smith, and as I type, it'll find that. And here I can, you can make arbitrarily complex Boolean expressions and do instant searching with them. I showed you earlier how you can, edit cells one at a time, but you can also edit multiple cells. For example, here I've got a catalog for a hobby shop. It's got all kinds of different trains and train items. And let's say I want to take all the freight cars and increase the price by $1.25. So I'll go up and do a selection, and we'll say everything that contains freight car. So there are 44 here that contain freight car. So I'd go to the price, and I say formula fill, and add $2. So those have all been increased. Now let's go back. Oops. Ooh, this is not good. Did I mention that this is beta software? All right. So you'll see it starting up. Searching for Rails apps. There it found all the Rails apps. And we were in Hobby Shop. Ugh, I keep doing that. So, I guess that's what I wanted. So now I'll select passenger cars, and let's go ahead and add $5 to those. And I'll say select all so I can see everything that's changed. And I want to upload changes to Rails. And so now the Rails table has been updated with all those changes. So it's real good for ad hoc changes. Obviously you could do this in Ruby, but this is good for doing things that are one-offs, one time, and you don't want to bother constructing something. You can just do it, get it the way you want. If you don't like it, just close it, don't save it, don't upload it, and then when you're ready, upload it. By the way, I should mention that we don't see this as a deployment tool. It's for it's a developer tool. It's for administrators and for developers. It's real good for getting started with new databases. For example, let's say I want to add a text file, import a text file, and make a new database. So I'll go here and say new file. I want to create a new Panorama database, and I'll drag this donor's text file. And it shows me the first line of the file. So now I just need to replace this with what I want the field names to be. So that's first, last, address, city, state, zip, email, phone. So now it's made a Panorama database that has the data from the text file. Now I'll go to Track Magic and say create new Rails table. And there's a special clones menu here. So I'll say I want to clone the Untitled database, and it automatically fills in the fields from this other database. Now in this case they're all string fields, but if there were something else, in this case since I'm cloning, it would set it automatically. But I didn't show this earlier, but when you're creating a new database or adding fields, you can use the pop-up menus. So we'll call this donor and say create table. And there it's showing the output of rake. And so now it's created a new Rails table, but it's still empty. So what I'll do is create a new Panorama database, and it remembers that I cloned, this is a clone, so it says, do you want to transfer the data from Untitled? It loads it into this database and uploads it to Rails. And because of that crash. But anyway, it's in there, and you can access it from Rails. It's also got a number. It's got a number of other tools that are just sort of handy tools for working with Rails application. Like you can open the migration dialog, and it'll show you all the migrations that have been applied to this application, and you can like tell it to go back and run back to an earlier level or go forward if you want automatically. You can set what version of Rails is required. So this app is currently set to run only on Rails 2.1.1. You can also freeze or unfreeze. You can open the app in TextMate. Just little shortcuts. Let's get back to. It will get in the application itself. It can automatically create fixtures for you. So whatever data is in the Panorama database, you can save that as a fixture, and it'll put it in the right spot in the Rails app. And then you can either reload it manually through TrackMagic or obviously through your test code. You can set the local field configuration. So in all the examples I've shown you, the local database has had the same fields in the same order as the Rails database, but they don't have to be. You can exclude some fields and only leave them only on the Rails database and not local. Or you can change the order if you want. And it can manage Mongrel, obviously. What we're planning on doing this, we're basically going to have two versions, a light version and a pro version, and we're giving both of them away. But the light version is going to be totally given away, and that basically is going to include like the browser capabilities and the abilities for creating new applications and doing migrations and things like that. And then the pro version is going to include all the database stuff, and that it's given away, but it'll be given away with our Panorama application. So you'll need to buy that. So that's basically the story. Does anybody have any questions? Panorama's normally $300, but we've been running specials for $100, and we'll be doing that with the Rails community. And it's Mac only, by the way. It's Mac only, and it requires Rails 2.0. Oh. Yeah. You mean a specific kind of log file, or? I mean, it's a general purpose database, so people have done that. You can do that. It's a pretty good tool for that. Yeah. Did you have something specific, or? Right. I mean, most log files are, they're usually text files, so they come right in. There's an import tool where if you say open file, you can. You can basically select a text file and it'll automatically create it, and if it's tab or comma delimited, it'll automatically create some fields. Or you can build a template in advance. If the fields aren't already delimited in some useful way, there's a lot of parsing tools with the formulas. I showed you some simple formulas where I was recalculating the prices, but there's actually a whole really rich, environment there where there's a bunch of tools that got to do things like, split it into different words or sentences or parse tag, pull out part tags, and you could, analyze XML with it, I really only touched the bare minimum of what Panorama could do, because this is really mostly you're mostly interested in the Rails stuff, but it's got a lot of power for that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yes, we spoke earlier, and obviously know a little more about Panorama. Maybe you could tell people about some of your more successful clients, sort of larger apps, so people can appreciate the performance.
Sure. Let me. Well, this particular app actually came, was initially inspired by some work at the University of Wisconsin. They've got several dozen copies of Panorama there, have for a long time, and they've been doing also been doing a lot of Rails work there. So there was some people that were doing both, and one of them actually did some of the very initial groundwork for this, and then we got together and he showed it to me, and I was like, well, that's kind of neat, but it could go so much further, because he was basically hand coding the links. So every time he did another Rails database, he had to hand program it, and I said, gee, that can all be automated so that you can just do it really quickly. So that's the biggest beta test site we have for this specifically, and they're really happy because they've got all these MySQL and Oracle databases that before they'd have projects that would back up, like somebody's like, well, I want this report, so somebody's got to go code it, and now they're just like, here, look, take a copy of Panorama, go download the data, and do whatever you want, and don't bother us. And they've also used it for one of the things that Panorama is really good at is cleaning up polluted data. So they've got things like where they've got data that's come in from multiple sources, and there's some mistakes in it, there's duplicates, and so Panorama is really good because it lets you mung it so quickly and easily. And they had one project where they thought that it saved them 6 months, and actually probably saved a contract that they would have lost. But they thought it was going to take them 6 months to do it in Oracle, and they did it in like 4 days in Panorama. As far as Panorama itself goes, Panorama's been around since 1988. And there was a predecessor called Overview that came out for the Mac on September of '84. We're actually the second oldest Mac software developer. The only company that's been developing Mac software longer than us is Microsoft. I think our program was like the 7th or 8th app to ship for the Mac back then. And we've always been RAM-based, which of course back in the '80s was more of a tough sell, because memory was a lot smaller. These days it's not so much of a problem. But it kind of gave us got us off to a slow start back at that time. So we kind of have our customers are it's kind of like the Mac customers in the general computing community. Panorama customers are really loyal. We've got a very loyal, vocal group of people. But it's definitely, compared to say the competition like FileMaker, we're a lot smaller. But there are people using it for all kinds of applications. I mean, obviously a lot of business applications, but there's a lot of researchers that use it. I think that's because they don't have to know where they're going when they start. It's so flexible. You can start, say, most databases, you've got to be very careful about getting all the field structure right before you start. Because if you wind up getting it populated, once you've got 1,000 records in it even, it's pretty difficult to say, gee, I wish this field was split into 2 fields, or, that sort of thing. But with Panorama, that's trivial. You can split fields apart, or rearrange them at any time, even if they've got 100,000 records in them. So there's, turns out there's a lot of photographers that use it. There's a person that uses it for college track meets. They used it for the Stanford track meet that had 30,000 entrants in it. And people are always asking him, well, could you do the Olympics? And he said, oh, the Olympics would be so easy because there's way less people and they all show up. Because for these college track meets, like the Stanford one had 30,000 people, And the software, he was using Panorama not just for the results, but to do all the heat and lane assignments and everything. And a lot of people just don't show up. So at the last second, they've got to figure out they don't want to have 2 people running in one of the heats and 6 in the other or something like that. So they had to do it all on the fly. And so he actually built an app that did track meet management, and he wound up doing really well because they'd go to track meets and the other coaches from other colleges would be like, how did you get, they'd have the results for all the races up in like 90 seconds or something. And at other, meets apparently, it would take like an hour or 2. And so they'd be like, how'd you do that? Oh, well, we use this program. Oh, okay. How do we buy that? So it's just there's a whole wide variety. We do also have, for the last 2 years, we've had a server version of Panorama, and it works a lot like this Rails interface. In fact, that's why when I saw what Eric was doing with Rails, I got so excited. What that does is every client has a local copy on their hard drive, which when they opens into memory, and the server also has a RAM-based copy on the server machine. And the server basically just only changes are managed on the network. So things like sorting and searching, analysis, printing, all the kind of stuff I showed you, that all happens on each local client with no network traffic. And then we're just synchronizing, records across and doing record locking, through the server. So, when I saw that was, basically when I saw that was capable in Rails, that you could do most of that. So we've got about 75% of what our server does in this Rails interface. It doesn't do record locking, and it doesn't do. When you download, you have to download the entire thing from Rails. We don't have any way of knowing that only 5 records have changed. But other than that, it does have that 2-way flow that allows you to do all kinds of cool things on the client side in RAM, and it still maintain that integration with the server.
Does it check what has happened since when you do an upload? Does it check any changes that have occurred?
No, it doesn't. But it only uploads data that's actually cells that actually changed. It keeps track of each cell. So you're only going to run into a conflict. Like if I edit this city, if somebody else has edited it, it's going to overwrite their edit, which is But if they have changed the name,
how about if
it won't touch that. Well, then you'll get an error.
Okay,
Yeah. Like I said, it's just doing standard active record calls. So what it does is it says, okay, here's the record ID number. So you'll notice that here there's a gray column that shows that's the Rails active record ID number. So everything keys off of that. So if the record's deleted, then when it goes to update it, it'll just what's that?
That sounds like a next feature to be able to see if it's being updated since the original value is being pulled. Perhaps in your next version, something you could.
Yeah, we looked at that a little bit. I'm not sure if that's possible because you'd really have to, hang on to that record for every single record in the database, and there could be thousands. So, I'm not sure if that's actually a viable thing to do, to hold all, you basically have to hold every record in the database. You'd have to hold an in-memory copy of the.
If your record would change, you just remember the original, and then when you go to upload, you'll see if the original is still the same or not.
Well, yeah, I guess you could do that.
It'll be a nice feature for search purposes.
Yeah, maybe. Right. Well, and again, that goes back to we don't see this as a production tool for deploying. And I'm going to be pretty firm in saying that. I know there's going to be some people out there that are going to do it anyway, but I've washed my hands of that, at least for now. So I think there's a lot of applications for this. Even just in the development environment, just to get, because the cool thing about Panorama is it makes your data visible. It's very visual and it gives you a very interactive. It's much more interactive than working with a web browser. So the two key core areas that I see are development and then things like reporting where that kind of thing doesn't matter. If you're doing, you need to print labels or print reports or something like that, you're basically, and you do have the option, let's see, I think it's in, local database options. Yeah, you can turn synchronization off. And if you do that, then it just won't write changes back to Rails at all. So if you wanted to give somebody a copy and allow them to, do reports, but you don't want them messing with the data, I mean, obviously you could do that from the Rails side as well, but we give you a way to do that so you don't have to worry about that on the Rails side. You can just do that. You can give them the database. And by the way, these tables are stored as files locally, and normally what we do is reveal in Finder. So there's that Rails app, and we put a folder in the vendor folder, and those are the tables. Those are actually the disk copy of the RAM tables. And in fact, I can open one directly from the Finder. I can just bring it up. I don't have to go through the TrackMagic interface. And in fact, if you wanted to give somebody, something just for reports, as long as they have a copy of Panorama, you can give them that file and say double click on it. They don't have to go through the TrackMagic interface or even have access to it. And it doesn't have to be in that spot either. You can move it somewhere else. It doesn't rely on it being in that spot. I mean, it does as far as, it won't show up in the TrackMagic interface if it's moved, but it'll still work as a database, and it'll still be linked to the Rails app as long as the Rails app is there. It stores the information about what the Rails app is in the database. It's in the file. It's not positional.
One question. When you're doing this, is it aware of like relationships, like has many and those kind of things in your models, or?
It has some ability for that. For example, here I've got this orders table that I was showing you. So this is a bunch of invoices, and there's another. These records have many line items, so that's another. I arranged this as separate tables, and if I go look at the model, so it has many line items, and it'll actually, if you've got a model that already has those relationships in it, it will recognize that, and so that'll add things like here I've got new line item, so it knows that, and so it'll go ahead and say, okay, that's got to be added to the other database, and it's got some other smarts for that, and it also has when you're creating tables, I didn't show that, but it's got some stuff. So when you want, it'll has a graphical interface that allows you to set up the typical. It doesn't support all the different kinds of relationships that are, but it does supports one-to-one and has many, which we thought were the most common ones. We may add more in the future, see what the response is. It's also when you're creating apps. Let's see, I gotta. It's been a while since I did this. It's got support for. I guess it must be in here. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so it's got some support for setting up validation. Obviously, so you can go in and say, well, I want to test for the link of, and we've got dialogues for all the different kinds of validations. It's just sort of a, basically I went through all the things that sort of annoyed me that I always had to go look up, and I was like, wait a minute, this is 2008, 2009 now, why isn't there a dialogue that, wizard that does that for me? So a lot of this stuff in here is basically went through everything that sort of annoyed me, and I thought, why do I have to remember this? Why doesn't the UI have that? And that's in there. So we can, say, well, I don't know, why isn't it letting me pick a field? But
Is the Rails deploy built into Panorama, or is it like an actual plugin that you have to download?
It'll be built in when the next version of Panorama comes out. We added support about a year and a half ago for Panorama's got its own programming language, but about a year and a half ago we added support that allows you to drop Ruby, Python, Perl, or PHP straight into Panorama code. So that's how we implemented this. Probably in the next few weeks, and we're looking for a few more beta testers. If anybody's interested, I've got some cards. Let me know. Any other questions? Oh, and by the way, I should mention this is the first public showing of any kind of this software. So, for what it's worth, and it's probably partly why I don't have the most polished presentation, because this is the very first one I've ever done. But
that concludes this episode of the SD.RB podcast. See you next time.